Okay. A couple things as we get started here. Just real quick. So, what we're going to do is the plan for going forward right now is going to be to we're going to do this week and next week both finishing up the Wise 301 stuff. So, my original plan was to try to accelerate things and have them move quicker so that you could be doing some of that stuff on your own. But I think it's worthwhile doing it in class and making sure that we're going maybe a little bit slower and make sure that we're doing all the things as a group. So, it puts us a little bit behind on the syllabus, but that's okay. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink down the Fmod section because I want to get right to Unreal pretty quick after this because we're already on classes with class 18 or 19 and out of 30. So we need to kind of like pick things up a little bit after this, but I do think that this is worth taking our time, finishing this one out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go moving forward. The plan is going to go to an accelerated Fmod. Probably only spend like 1 week, maybe a week and a half on Fmod. Jump right into Unreal and then look at the Unreal integration. So basically, we're going to look at the integration with Wise with Unreal. So we'll spend a fair amount of time just like getting familiar with Unreal and how it works, and then hopefully we'll have like enough time to like I want to have some like experimental days, but also have time to really focus on working on the final project, which we'll start talking about pretty soon here. But I want to get through this section with the Wise 301 stuff before we start talking about the final project stuff. So, yeah. So in terms of getting where we want to be at with this stuff, I basically have I posted a two assignments. So one of them is Wise 301 1 through 4. The second one is Wise 301 5 through 8. So the Wise, the number 9 is basically building your own Wise project, and I don't know that there's actually much of a quiz for that one, but yeah. So basically, we have what I'd like to see if you can get done is get the Wise 1 through 4, which I mean, like that was up through last week, but I'd like to get that done through this Friday, which isn't a ton of time, but like I said, you can blast through these in about an hour each if you need to. If you really want to accelerate it, to really internalize it takes a few more rounds through it, but at least to get the quiz, to get the score, to get the thing done, you can just get through it pretty quickly. I mean, through brute force and trial and error, you can actually figure out you can take the quizzes without actually even doing the thing. Um, I had to do a couple of the quiz questions a couple days ago when I was doing this section. I got snagged on this one, and I had to like brute force it like a few times to get the answer for it. But you can get this thing done. Anyway, I'm looking for 1 through 4 this Friday and 5 through 8 the following Friday. So a week from Friday is when I'd like to have the rest of those done. So it's gonna be like if you haven't started on these things, it's gonna take a little bit of time to like sit down and hammer on this stuff. But it sounds like some people have gotten pretty far along with this stuff. So, but you will need to dedicate a fair amount more time to this thing, depending on how the level of depth that you want to get and understanding with this thing. So, yeah, if you have any snags or issues, let me know. But seems to be working pretty well for me. So I'm gonna forge on. So, okay. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna be doing lesson 6 on the wise stuff. So let's take a look at what we want to like. Well, yeah, I guess we're gonna just pull it up. There is some of the stuff. Let's do. Okay, let's pull up the project. So what we're gonna be looking at today is how to use regions. So let's take a think, just take it from a bird's eye perspective for a couple minutes here. What we want to do is if we have our characters running around through this scene, and it could be 2D side scroller, or it could be a 3D world environment, kind of like what we've got right now, first or third person running around in that world. And what we want to do is have the environment react to us. So when we think about things like in either music or in linear post production, when you walk into say a room, and or like let's just using like drums as an example, for reverb. So if I want to use reverb as a cohesive tool for all of my instruments, or I guess what we use reverb to create cohesion, create a sense of space. So to do that, usually we're going to use a reverb, and we're going to use an aux send. So the way we effectively use aux sends in music and in post is or to use reverbs is we use one reverb with lots of augs. Aug sends to that reverb unit. So basically you have your dry sound and it's augmented with the reverb over here. So you send that over here and send that over here. And in a linear environment, all we do is, like in Pro Tools or whatever, is you create an aug send and send it to that reverb, and that reverb has 100% of the wet, and you augment the original signal with that. And that's all fine and that's great. And if you're working in film and you're creating a scene, that's awesome. But in the game world, everything's dynamic, everything's changing, everything's not linear, so it has to react to the player running through the scene. So we have to figure out a way to dynamically enable the aug sends and disable those aug sends based off of the environment, because generally speaking, unless we, like, as we're running around, that the environment is going to be done as aug sends. If we go into a space where it's going to be completely different sounding, then that's when we would do more of the switch, or the switch states, not switch, but the state changes. So if we were to go into, say, underwater or something like that, that's a different type of system. We wouldn't use an aug send for that one. If we go underwater and everything, we do like a low pass filter and add some water sound effects and that sort of thing, we would use a state change instead for something like that. But for general, like, ambient stuff, if I'm in a castle, or like using this, I'm just using this game as an example, the Wise Adventure game. If you're in the forest, if you're in a castle, if you're in a cave, or if you're in a hallway, each of those are going to have a different reverb quality. And it sounds kind of strange to use reverb outdoors, but it does add a little bit to it, because we're trying to create an environment that reacts to the person. So what we need to do is we need to have these augs dynamically change on and off. And so that's what the focus for today is. Fortunately, it's not that complicated. Well, I guess it's double-sided. The concept is very simple and the implementation is relatively simple, but the details are pretty complicated, and there's a few things that I still have. I've gone through this a few times now, and there's a few things that are a little fuzzy for me on, but I think I've got it this time. So let's take a look at how we're going to do this. So basically what we want to do is we want to have it so that our system dynamically changes. So let's do adding AK environments to a trigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to create these zones. These essentially trigger zones, and what they're what do they call them? They call them AUX environments. So AUX environments is what they're calling them. That's kind of the lingo that they're using right here. So if we kind of look at this one, this is how they have it set up right now. All of these are different AUX environments. So if I go to the cave, for instance, and let's go check out the cave. It's weird that they call it. Oh, yeah, because it's underneath. So the cave environment is underneath there. And what they've done is they've created these basically box colliders that are triggers. So when I walk into one of these spaces right here, and it doesn't matter which one it is, well, I mean, I guess it does. If I walk into one of these right here, it's going to trigger that environmental reverb or that AUG send. And so they call basically they call them AUX environments. And what that means is that it's basically a trigger that that enables an AUG send inside of Wwise. So that's what we're going to focus on for just a little bit today. So let's start without this one, and we're going to look at this one right here, this training area. And so let's just take a look at what we've got going on with it. Sorry, good. Let's make this a little bigger. In here, they've created this mesh collider. So the mesh collider. So up to this point, what we've been mostly working on is like a box collider or a sphere collider. You can make those colliders any shape that you want, but the goal is you actually they're much more efficient. Like, you don't want to make a box collider, or you don't want to make a mesh collider that's like, say you want this tree right here, that if anything touches this tree, that it's going to trigger a sound, for instance. So we could just create using this, like if I created a mesh out of this tree right here, you could create a very complex one so that if I touch this tree, it will trigger, or if it doesn't. And so the problem with that is it requires a relatively high geometric, well, it's not that high, but a high poly count geometric shape. And that's pretty inefficient. So, well, it's tasking on the computer. So if I have a high poly count tree, and this isn't that high, but I mean, if it's but compared to a box, it is. But if I have like 5,000 trees, that's gonna task the computer quite a bit. So the goal is we generally try to use the smallest poly box or mesh collider as possible. So what we've been doing up to this point has been just using boxes, and boxes do a pretty good job. Or like in this case, what I would probably do is add a sphere collider. So you could add a sphere or like either I'm sorry, a cylinder collider for the trunk and maybe a sphere collider for the top to create a general shape. And when you so that when my character runs, it doesn't actually like run through this thing. But usually you'll see that oftentimes you can't actually get as close to it as you think you can. That's because the collider is actually set out from the object itself. But in this case, if you have some relatively complex environments where you need to have at least a box isn't going to work because maybe they're overlapping too much, that that you have the ability to create a mesh collider. And we spent a little bit of time when we were doing the Unity training stuff on how to create geometric shapes. And so you could create your own geometric shape, which is basically just creating a mesh. And so you create a mesh, and then you basically just use that. So I'm not very good at that sort of thing. So they've done this thing for us right here. Like if you want to look at just the shape of this thing, this is what it's looking like. So it's kind of got this weird diamond looking shape right here. So that basically it's confined there, because if I were to do a box and I don't want that reverb environment to work over here, I just want it to work in this training area down here. And it's kind of uh, like this cave. I would say it's like a valley. So you might have some room, some not room, but some reflections off these cave walls here. So to give it a sense of reverb. So to do this, and they also colored it red. They use this trigger red just so we can actually see the thing. So what we want to do is we want to add, add an environment on here. So what they call these OGS environments is basically an AK environment. So AK environment equals an OGS send environment in Wwise. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to do AK environment. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. I can't see because you guys' pictures are in the way. Let me change that. So let's do AK environment. And I won't say that's all there is to it, but that in the beginning, that's kind of how what the main parts of this thing is. So we've got this, our mesh collider right here, and it's set to is trigger. So when it's set to is trigger, it means it won't actually stop the people running through it, or things can pass through it. So when I don't have this enabled, it becomes a hard surface and a hard wall. But this will allow us to run through the thing, so it's just a trigger right there. And so what you could do is actually you want to keep the collider on, but you can turn off the mesh renderer if you want. That's how you actually play the game. But since we want to be able to see this thing just for right now, we'll keep the mesh renderer on. And what we want to do is we want to add the OG send to this. So in Wwise, if we go over to our Wwise project, let me pull that in here. What we have is our, like, let's look at our buses here. Somebody has oh, there we go, cool. If I go look at my Mr. Max hierarchy, I got a master audio bus for my non-world and world. So this is going to be like menu stuff, I think. Is that what they had on there? Microphone, music, arcade, music stinger, UI. So that's I don't even know what these music stingers are, but oh yeah, so the music is not part of the world stuff. That makes sense. And then we have our world environment here. So in here we have our ambient OGS player. So they created essentially an OGS thing right here. So this world encompasses everything that happens in the game, and then they created sub buses based off of that one. So we have some OGS regions right here, and then inside this we have our region, village, and training. So this one right here is the one that we want to use. And if we look at, like, just inspect this one for a second, we can see that what they're doing is they have an effect on here. They have a wag exterior, like basically it's this is the reverb they're using right here. So it's just essentially the reverb that they set up for outside, and we can see that it's like negative 96 for the dry, and early reflections is negative 24 in reverb. It's weird that they cut up early reflections separate from the reverb, but whatever. This is with the early reflections, and this is the reverb. So I don't know why they have those set so low, but that's the way they've got it, and I'm not going to touch it for right now. So right now, what ends up happening is what we want to do is we want to enable this OG send dynamically, so that when I walk into that zone, it turns it on. And so over here, we're going to go to, we want to enable this one here in our Wwise Adventure game. So I'll just walk through the same hierarchy. So we look at, we want to master audio bus, world, OGS, region cave. We want to do region village training. And I can say, okay, cool. And at this point, that's all there really is to it, because they already have set up a lot of this stuff for us ahead of time, which is good and bad. Good because it kind of gets you going. Bad because it brushes a lot of the details under the rug. But let's put it to work and see if it's actually working for us. So what I'm going to do is, it's a little tight. I usually run this on 2 separate screens, but let's see if I can just make this thing fit in here. It's pretty snug. But let's see, do I have my oh, I don't have my layouts, my 2-3 stacked. That's okay. This will work. So over here, I want to look at my profiler. Oops. And I want to connect to, oh, actually, what I want to do is under our voices graph right here. So there's all these different things you can profile. And on this, I want to look at our voices graph, because this is going to give us a signal path to see if it's actually using the system that we tell it to. So I'm going to open this up, and I want to look at, we can look at a bunch of different stuff, but in this case, I want to look at, sorry, I've got fruit flies. I don't know, well, I don't have any gross stuff around here, but these drive me crazy. So I want to look at I want to monitor the bus to see what the buses are enabled. So I'm going to look down here. I'm going to go to World, Augs, Region Village, Training. And so what I want to do is I want to specifically monitor just the training. So let's connect to the game. Connect. And we are now listening. So let's play the game. It's tiny, but that's okay. And already we see it. There, so we see our main camera right here. We have our Wwise room verb right here. So this is our training Augs bus right here. So indeed, it's actually working right here. So we have a pitch shifter on our Augs bus. I'm not sure why we have that. It must be used for something else. But we do have an Aug send occurring right now. So that's good. And if I run, let's run outside of that collider. So if I back up, we can see the collider. That went away. So by that completely vanishing, that shows that indeed our Augs was dynamically enabled. And if we listen, oh, what probably happened is I went into a different environment. So this other environment that I'm in over here has a different reverb going on. So I don't know which one that is, but it definitely has. But we can see, so we're still hearing some reverb, but it's a different reverb. And here. And then that one came back in. So our Wwise reverb kicked back in, and we're back in there. So it sound to our ear, actually, it's going to sound the same, because I'm guessing. Let's go. Actually, stop this thing and see what the story is. So if I were to look at my Augs environments, yeah. So we have our training area right here, and then when I ran across over here, I went into the village, and so the village, maybe the village one. Where is that? Where's my village? So it has an AK environment script for village right here, and if we go back into Wwise and see what the story is on our AK village, or on our village, it has a plate reverb on that one right there. So it does have a reverb that happened when I went into that other room. So if I weren't specifically looking at the, well, no, let's not work. Well, I guess we should. Let's just take a look at it. If I were to monitor instead of just training right here, if we went up a level and look at region village, we would see that it would switch from training to village here. So let's see if that happens. Come on. Play the game. So, huh? I must be overlapping because I'm in the village. It's using both the village and the training one right now. Whoa! stuck. I am stuck. I cannot get out of this corner. All right, whatever. Oh, that sucks. But we can see that we can see what we're using here. So the village, that's interesting that it's using both of those. There must be some sort of overlap or something going on right where I was. Oh, was I in an overlap section? Yeah, I think I was in an overlapped area. Maybe, not sure. I can't tell for sure, but um, that could potentially cause some problems. So if I were really concerned about that, what I could do is make my mesh colliders so they didn't overlap one another and that they were actually just butted up right against each other. That can be kind of a pain, but you can do it to get it so that it's only hitting one of those at a time. So in essence, that's all we're really doing is we're adding a trigger. So this is essentially a trigger zone. All we had to do, basically all we had to do was add, where's my training? All we had to do was add this AK environment script and then point it to the training aug sends. So that's the beginning of this thing. And I think that's the easiest, that's conceptually the easiest part. So the next part is we want to look at this, how do we do this thing from scratch? So what we want to do is, let's go to Autokinetic, certification, 3.1, 6, creating an augs environment. So what we want to do is we're going to create an augs environment for the woodlands. We've seen this woodlands quite a bit right here. So it's got these different kinds of trees. So we got pine trees over here. And what we want to do is create an augs system from here. And if we look over in our Wwise, we should see that. Let's take a look at what we've got. So we have, these are our augs sends right here. And this is the woodlands one that we want to use right here. And we have there's actually two separate ones. There's road to woodlands and woodlands. So this is the one we're going to want to use, and it's using this again a Wwise audio game exterior custom. So they created their own plugin right here. So we want that send to be enabled when we walk into the forest. So let's play this thing just to see first that it doesn't have that it's pretty dry. I'm still getting a fair amount of reverb right there. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Okay, there it is. So I was in another region right there. So you can hear that when it's completely dry. So there's not anything. When I ran into it, it took me a little while to get into the village. I must be overlapping. Let's take a look at my augs environments again. Must have some other stuff. It's hard to see it. All right. Well, anyway, what we want to do. Oh yeah, I had to run over the bridge and into the forest. So this is. I don't know what that collider I was on was. Road to Woodlands. So Road to Woodlands already has that reverb, and that's that one that we were looking at. So what I want to do is add a reverb for the woodlands over here that's opposite. So this Road to Woodlands does have its own reverb. We want to add that one over here instead. So to do that, let's go through and create. I'm going to create a 3D object cube. And here, we'll call this Woodlands. And where did it put that thing? Yeah, flew that thing super far away. I'm not sure how, I haven't spent enough time with it, but I'm not sure how it decides where to fly things into. Let's bring that way down. Just until we can see it. Sorry, this is a little agonizing to watch, I know. I feel like I must have some sort of like slow scroll thing enabled somewhere. My stuff is scrolling crazy slow. But, okay. So we have our scale, which is what, E? Or, no, it's R. So let's make this thing big. So I'm gonna build a trigger zone. Cool. I think that looks pretty good. Because that's the road, and so once we get into here, that's the woodlands. Yep, I think that'll work. So with that, what we want to do is make that is trigger so that we can walk through it. And let's add it. So I have two options. I could just turn off the mesh renderer right there, and that just works by itself. And that's the way you should actually run the game. But because I want to be able to see when I'm in and out of it, I'm going to choose this trigger red. So if I just search for red, and I'm just going to drag it onto there, you can create your own material for that too, so that I can just see when I enter that zone that it's actually going to work. And cool. So with this, let's go to woodlands. Block collider is trigger. Okay, so next thing we want to do is add components, and let's add an AK environment. And when we did this, it's going to give us a couple warnings here. So the first thing says interaction between AK game object and AK environment, AK room requires a rigid body component. So what happens here is when you have a collision detection, you need to have a rigid body. So the rigid body is what actually does the collision detection. If I just have two mesh renderers and I have them, they pass through one another, there's nothing that actually triggers that detection. They don't understand when a mesh, like my mesh of my player, interacts with the mesh of this woodlands like mesh renderer right here. So what we have to do is we actually have to add a rigid body, because the rigid body is what's actually going to do the trigger calculations. So you only need one rigid body. You can have more, but you only need one rigid body between things. So I can either have my player be the rigid body and this environment be the non-rigid, and it goes collision detection, or I can have the environment, and then I can have the rigid body on my person. But in this case, but generally speaking, what they try to do is you try to minimize the number of rigid bodies in your scene. And so I don't know why you wouldn't just use it on the player, but the best practice, according to them, is that you add the rigid body here. And so basically it just says add rigid body. So when you add the rigid body, right, you just that's all you have to do is turn that thing on, and that's what's going to allow the collision detections to happen. So that's all we need to say right there. And then in this case, we want to send this one to be woodlands. So this is attaching it to my Wwise og send. So I'm going to go over to my woodlands. Cool. So at this point, what's happened is we've created this trigger zone, and so that anytime that we go in there, anything that is attached to this or inside of this that creates a sound, when it's inside this, anything that creates a sound will get attached to the aux bus. Now one of the crazy important things we need to notice here is that when I look at my sounds, my audio actor mixer hierarchy, let's see how they have this thing laid out. This took me a little bit to kind of like wade through a little bit, but when we have our world right here, actually let's go look at like our player. So we have like our sword sounds and our health. Let's see, movement. No, not that one. What is it? Melee? Where is her voices? Weapon dialogue? Maybe that's it. There it is. So let's listen to that.
Hi! Ha! Yeah!
That's the one that we're used to hearing. And we can hear the dialogue. Hard one.
Hi! Yeah!
But that's the one that we're used to hearing right here.
Ha!
And if we look at this on their general settings right now, we can see that it's routing. Essentially, it's routing. The output bus is going straight to player. Is basically going straight out of the player bus. But what we need to see right here is that the game-defined auxiliary sends. Now we spent a little bit of time on this when we did Cube back in the day, but it was kind of like one little blip in that whole like string of learning Cube, and it was there, but we maybe not have like hit in on that as much as we need to. So what we need to do is our game-defined auxiliary sends. We need to say like we actually did have to do that. So when we were in Cube, you'd walk down into the whatever tunnel thing, and it would turn on the aux send, and when you walk out of it, it would turn off the aux send. And that was one thing, is because it was already set up in Cube. We didn't have to touch it. We didn't have to deal with it. But now we actually have to set it up on both sides, both in Wwise and in Unity. So what we want to see is this game-defined auxiliary send. So basically, when she swings, and she's inside this thing. We say we want this thing to say, I want this to be controlled right here. But if we look at where we actually are controlling this thing over in here, we're controlling woodlands, or it's coming in on the woodlands one right here. That we want this to be able to switch. We want that to switch to woodlands. So basically, this OGS is going to switch to any one of these regions and any of these sub buses right here, based off of that trigger. So if we kind of go up the hierarchy right here, if we go up to swing dialogue, it's still, so it's basically it's inheriting all of its parent stuff. So like as we go up the hierarchy here, everything goes down here unless I say override the parent. So this one just says listen to the parent. So everything, remember that all this hierarchy set up here, and that's the beauty of using the actor mixer hierarchy or the actor mixer object right here, is that it's essentially it's just built to act as a parent for all its sub for all its children in there. So we go up here, we go up to swing weapon type, it's still using its parents stuff. We go up to melee, it's still using its parent stuff, and then we go up to player, and then here we see that it's saying sorry, this one's doing it, and then we get to player right here. Where was that? Did I miss it? Dang it! I'm looking for. Oh, I'm sorry. So it says use game. Like I'll go back to my melee stuff. So it's saying use game defined auxiliary sends, but it's grayed out, and that's because it's inheriting this from its parent somewhere. So that's what I'm like trying to find right now is go up this, up this, up this, up this, up this. You can still see it's grayed out because it's inheriting from its parent, and it's not until we get all the way up to world that says this is the one that says use game defined auxiliary sends, and this is crucial that you have this thing set up, because this is what's going to define, like if you don't have this one right here, it's not like basically Wise is deaf to what Unity is telling it. So this one will say, okay, I'm listening to what Unity is sending, and I will change my aug sends based off of what Unity tells me to do, and that's what we've set up right here. And so by saying I want you to switch to woodlands for your aug send when you're in this trigger right here. So that's really important that we set that thing up, so so we get that set up in there. So I don't need to touch that. That was already set up for us, so we don't have to touch anything in there, which is nice. But when you're building your project, it's going to kind of be this back and forth thing. And I've not done enough of this that I understand like always the best practices, but I think that the way they have this set up looks pretty kind of like good. I would think that this is kind of an intuitive way to set this up for a 3D world game where you're running around. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do though is when we want objects to interact with one another. So this collision, and when we did triggers before, if you recall, we had to say what we wanted this to get like triggered by. When we were doing things like the AK environment, AK event, that sort of stuff, we were using the trigger to trigger that stuff. Well, AK environment works a little bit different in that it needs to understand, instead of pointing saying the player is going to be what triggers this right here, this environment right here, it's going to say basically anything that crosses that through that with the AK object will start to use those sounds. So there's this thing, if we use I don't know if we have it set up anywhere, but there's this object called the AK which one is it called? It's called the AK object, but AK game object. So on my player right here, we've got some player attacks, some scripts right here, but one of the things that we need to do is we need to track where that player is relative to this thing right here. And to do that, we need to use this AK game object. So this needs to be added to anything that's going to be, this AK game object right here needs to be added to anything that's going to be tracked in terms of this environment. And I'm sorry, I'm like my description of this is a little bit vague because it's hard for me to describe how this works. But basically, you when you have this one set up as a rigid body, you need to have a AK game object that collides with that to set that up. So basically, as that passes through that has to have an AK game object, and that AK game object is going to go with any of the, I believe, any of the sound sources. That's the one I'm a little fuzzy on. I believe it has to be on any of the sound sources that are within there, but or any game objects. I'm sorry, any game objects that are sound sources. I believe that have to have a hat on there. I'm a little fuzzy on that one. But the important thing right here is this AK game object script right here is that this right here is this environmental aware. I'm a little fuzzy on, like, I just know that you need to have that. I'm not entirely sure the mechanics behind it. All I know is that you need to have that on there for it to work. But what this actually triggers or disables, I'm still a little fuzzy on. I haven't been able to root that one out, figure out why that's there. That's all, but that's all we need to do right there. Is just add that in there, and at this point, it should work for us. So let me just double check that I hit everything. Yeah, let's double check that I did as trigger. Yep, as trigger. Cool. All right, so let's actually see if it's working for us now. So what should happen as I start, it drops me in the game, I think over here, as I run into the forest or into the woodlands area. That's actually not very good on the woodlands, is it? I need to stretch that out. That's okay. I think it'll. Let's make it slightly better. Oops, scale. Just so it goes all the way over to the waterfall. Cool. And let's play. So actually, let's profile this just to double check that it's working. Let's go F6. And I was doing the region village before. Actually, I was doing the training area is what I wanted to see. It was this training area. But so what we want to do now is focus on the woodlands. I could do region woodlands, and I mounted both the road to woodlands and woodlands, but let's just look at woodlands to start this thing off. Sorry. Dang it, come on. Sorry. There we go. And recall.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hi. Ha.
Cool. So what we're seeing there is that. So what we saw there, if I back up in time, started playing the game, and as it was going, I think I have it overlapping. So we're both in the road to woodlands and to woodlands at the same time. Now that can present some problems. That means just that I'm sending. I have two augs sends live at the same time, so I could get double the reverb, which can be a problem. So what that should probably mean is I should probably go in with a mesh renderer instead of using a box. I should use a mesh collider instead of a box collider, so I could tighten that up around the forest exactly where I want that to be, so that there's not a lot of overlap between these two. In some cases, you might not notice it, but that's probably not a good thing. And as I was running deeper into the forest, as I crossed that threshold, basically, it seems so weird because I was outside the renderer. I wonder why that was still running. Not entirely sure about why that was, but when I did get past far enough into the woodlands, that road to woodlands vanished, and I was left with just the woodlands og send right there. So it was working. So that's exactly what we wanted to see happen, is that it works. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how we want to set this thing up. So basically, you just run through, trigger that, and it switches the og's environment. It's still like I said, it's a little fuzzy on me for where the game so you have to have a game object on the person, but on also the other elements. I'm still a little bit fuzzy on how that one works right there, but getting closer. So the next step, so if once you get that kind of set, you should go over, turn off your mesh renderer so we don't see it, and we'd be good to go. Now there's going to be cases where you're going to have environments inside of environments. So basically like maybe there's a nook. Well, actually, let's just do it. So let's take a look at this one. Actually, let me make sure I hit everything I needed to hit. Okay, yeah. That if I go over to, where's my cabin? Cabin in the woods. So I've got this cabin right here. Why am I seeing the renderer? Show grid, selection outline. Okay, so I've got my little cabin right here. And what we want to have happen, and this could be like a cabin, it could be a cave, it could be, I don't know, just some sort of environment inside of an environment. So in this woods, this woods environment that we have set up, we have that reverb, that kind of reflective reverb as we run around. And as I go inside of here, excuse me, we want this to change. So in other words, we want to change to the cabin one in here. The problem is I've got my mesh renderer, which is massive. Oh, well, I guess box render in this case. It's box render in this case. And what I don't want to do is go through and create a pocket inside that. It's hard to create like an inside, like, I guess what I could do is create two sandwiched versions of that mesh renderer around it and say don't use the woodlands environment when I go inside of this thing right here. That's really, really complicated and really difficult. So what we want to do is we want to come up with a more sophisticated manner of, well, not sophisticated, but an easier approach, so that when I go into this cabin right here, I'm going to use the cabin's og send or whatever. I create a separate og send that has a different kind of quality sound, that has a smaller, tighter sound, a warmer sound, so like a wooden cabin instead of like a giant reflective sound, reflective environment. So to do that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add a collider over this, but there's a trick. So, but there's a couple other tricks that we can look at on the way to get to this. So I'm going to actually reload the scene real quick, just because, or reload this because I went ahead a little bit, and I don't know where I started. So I'm going to go back to this one right here because I don't remember where I started. Yeah, it starts me in the training area. I forgot where it started me. So what I want to do is I want to add a collider to that. So this is just a little side technique that we want to go through. It's kind of a neat little trick. So what I'm going to do is in my OGS environment, I want to create a woodlands, we call it woodland cabin. What do they want to call it? I'm going to call it the, yeah. Let's create a woodlands cabin. So I could do a couple things. I can create a 2D, I'll just do a box collider for this one. I can do a box collider right here, or I can just, inside of here, I can create just a box collider, copy cube, or create cube, and we'll call this one woodland cabin. Is that, yeah. Is that what I wanted to call it? Sorry, I need to double check that I'm calling this thing the right thing. Okay. Yeah, that is it. Woodlands cabin. Okay. Is it Woodlands? Not that it really matters. The name doesn't really matter, but I'll call it Woodlands cabin. So where is that box? Let's find it. It put it super far away. That's annoying. So what I want to try and do is overlay this this collider on top of the cabin, but I have to drag that thing all the way over there, which is well, I just did that a minute ago with the other one, and that was kind of a pain. So there's a little bit of a trick that we can do is we can move this thing to the cabin by copying the properties of the position of the cabin, and that'll make it a whole lot easier. So if I go back over to my cabin in the woods, and I go to it, what I'm going to do is, well, it's cabin in the woods. I've got my inspector right here. This is my collider for it, my mesh collider. But this is also this is my position of the thing right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I can say copy the component. I'm going to go back to my woodlands cabin here, my thing, and what I can do is I can paste my transform in there. So the transform is just the position, and so I'm going to say paste component values. Bam. Let's go back and find it. So what it did is it put that renderer. Let's turn off all this. It put my renderer right inside of there. So that was a quick way to move this thing over my box collider over to the cabin without having to like drag it for 10 years to find out where it was. Because for whatever reason, I don't know where it decides to put when you create an object. I haven't figured that out yet. It just seems to me like it kind of puts it in a random spot. It's not random. I know there's a reason for where it puts it, but I don't know why. So now what we want to do is we want to make this thing cover the here. So let's stretch this thing out a bit. Let's rotate it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Yeah, seems to be covering that. So I'm gonna go back over and again, if you want to find it, you can just make it. I could just drag this thing. Actually, we should. Well, no, I'm gonna turn it red. You don't need to have it with. Let's do red. You don't have to do that. Let's see, target red. So on there, just so I can see the renderer. When you're actually playing the game, you should turn off the mesh renderer. But I want to be able to see it for right now, just so we can see what it looks like. And in this case, we want to go back and we do the same things we did before. So we want to say that this is a box collider. We want to say it is trigger. We want to add an AK environment. Okay, environment. We need to add a rigid body to it. And we want this to be the woodlands. So we got to connect it to Wwise. So region woodlands, region pine forest. Pine Forest Hut is, I think this is the one we want. So the Pine Forest Hut is going to be the OG settings, and if we go over here, we can see what we're looking at. World OGs. OGs. This is going to be the Pine Forest Hut. Let's see what they've done in that. Effects. So we have a matrix reverb. It's just a different kind of reverb there. I don't know which one that is. So I haven't experimented much with the effects on these things. In general, I have a hard time. I think that most of these kind of suck. But what they have is they have a convolution reverb, which is like it solves all the problems with everything, I think. But it's a licensed plugin that you have to add on, which I think is super annoying. It's annoying that they don't give you the convolution plugin for free. I wish there was a way we could do that, but I've noticed that they talked about it actually in the Unreal 5 demo. That basically, or the PS5, well, I guess it is also Unreal 5, but the PS5 demo, they're talking about that they have, like, I think convolution reverbs built into Unreal, which is really cool. So, but that's not using Wwise. That's just using the Unreal Engine. But we're gonna get to Unreal Engine soon. Yeah, so cool. Let's move that out of the way. And so we've got our basically our whole thing set up here. And let's go to our player, make sure our player has the AK object on it. Already has it on there. It's environment aware, so we're solid there. And let's go back to this one. Okay, so let's go in and play this and just give it a listen. Uh-oh. My audio system's screwed up. Does this sound screwed up to you guys? I can't tell. Sorry, let me turn on my chat. So, for some reason, with I use Motu hardware here, and every once in a while, like I have to turn off my hardware and recycle it back on again, which is super annoying. It's only when I'm in Windows. This is like a Windows Motu thing, and it got me right now. So everything's screwed up. Do I sound like clear enough? Can you hear me? Is my voice screwed up, or does it sound okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Sounds cool to me.
You guys all sound like robots to me. I can't hear anything. Can you type it in the chat? I can't hear anything. It's all fluff, 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 fluff. It sounds all strange to me. Okay. I don't know if it's just the headphone thing or not, but I can't hear anything, so I have to recycle. I'm gonna turn off my interface and back on. It takes like a second to power back up, and I have to reset all my audio stuff. So give me a second here. I'll just turn this off. It's gonna default to the microphone on the webcam. Gotta give it a second. It's just using the crappy mic. Motu hardware takes forever to boot. Still booting. Like it's like a whole computer inside of it. Come on.
Okay.
Hello. All right, back. I'm gonna press play, see if I can get this to work again, because it was not sounding good to me. So you can kind of hear a little bit of a comb filtering effect. And the reason for that is that it's using both OGG sends at the same time. So we've got kind of two things happening. So to double check that, let's go look at our profiler, and let's go look in. Well, actually, let's just look on the player instead. So we can look at the buses, but we can also just look at the player. And so if I look at the world player, I could go down in there further if I wanted to. That's fine. Let's just use that. And let's watch this one. Yeah, Trent, you're totally right. It does sound like a snare. It's that kind of comb filter double tap. So if we back up in time here, I'm swinging around at the end. There it is. So it's adopting, it's on the player, it's using both, the OGG send is using both the woodlands and the pine forest hut. And that's bad because it's doubling that up. So what we want to do is when we go into the hut, we want to disable woodlands and use just the pine forest hut. Fortunately, they made, and I'm guessing that this is enough of an issue that they came up with just a kind of a fairly simple solution for this thing. Is that what we have here on our AK environment script? We can say exclude all others. So what that says is when this one goes in, disable every other OGG send that's happening for this person at that time. So that should take care of that, and we should be able to just go in and not hear that double tap snare looking thing, sounding thing. Yep. Cool. So it does work. So effectively, that's and then I guess what I should do is turn off my mesh renderer here, and we're good to go there. So in essence, I mean, I'm kind of playing the slow today because that's all there was on this one. So today's, I would say it's kind of easy. It's a little bit trickier when you're building out your own game. So I've gone through that a couple times and I'm still having some problems. Mostly for me because I don't have like attack sounds. I only have a first person character, so I'm trying to come up with some a different way of creating sounds, like trigger sounds off of. Well, I guess I could. Yeah, I guess I could. I just thought of some other ways I could do some triggered sounds, but I don't have like an attack sound, so it was harder for me to recreate this with my own game. But effectively, I mean, basically, all you're doing is just creating trigger zones, and then you have zones inside of zones. But there's a few clutch things you need to remember. Is basically like the is trigger, and that everything that interacts with it has to have the game AK game object attached to it, so that it's aware of what things are interacting, and it also have to have a rigid body on there, and then also have your stuff set up in Wwise correctly so that it's listening to this one right here is listening to, oops, not TPC, that it's using use gain find auxiliary sends, because otherwise if you don't use that, it's just going to just use an OGG send, like the reverb will be on all the time. So I think what's happening here though is we're just starting to get a glimpse of how complex this can be. Even something simple as running around and shooting guns, or picking up items or solving a puzzle, can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. And so we can, like, having good clean arrangement in Wwise is pretty important, as it would be like in a normal mixing session where you have all of your stuff, like your drums over here, your melody instruments over here, your voice over here, and your augs is over here, and sends. Basically, good session organization is going to be what is going to be really helpful. But without that experience of going through this with a real game a few times, I think it's a little bit tough looking at this like from the outside. So I think this will become like clearer once we start working on real games. And I think we're going to try and get this set up probably next week. I'm going to have the DAC people come in and start pitching, and we're start try and sign up for some real projects. So and that's likely going to be a big part of Game Audio 2, which we're going to be doing next semester. So if you want to get involved in doing some real projects and have a real game that you work on besides your own, then that would be a really good thing to get in on. So yeah, I mean, this one's actually pretty straightforward. It was a pretty small one. I think this is a whole lot easier than the scripting stuff. So I'm still working on scripting. I'm getting better at it, but it's pretty tough for me. So that's really all we have for going on today. So we're done a little bit early here. But so, does anybody have any questions? What do you think?
I feel like everything makes sense to me right now, but I know there's going to be something that I forget when it actually comes time. But in
Yeah,
theory, everything
I know.
makes sense right now.
Yep, me too. But that was the thing, as I was blasting through this, I was like, oh yeah, it totally makes sense. And then I went through and I tried to implement this in my own game, like adding my own little stuff. And I'm missing a couple steps in there that I'm still a little bit stuck on. But I think actually, even after today's discussion, I think I'm way stronger with it. So I'm like, I think I can figure this out. So, but I don't think I could do it live still. There's enough head scratching and it's boring watching me try to troubleshoot. So I think I'm not going to do that as a live thing right now today, but yeah. Cool. Well, I guess so I think we're gonna call it just a little bit early today because I just don't that was the end of that one. So we can start diving into the next one. So the next couple sections, there's one on the music section. This one's kind of the Wise 301 stuff is sort of expecting that you did the Wise 251 certification, which we did not do, which is the interactive music stuff. So we're just gonna have to kind of muddle our way through that one. That's also part of Game Audio 2, is we're gonna spend a lot more time on music and talk about the music side of the stuff. And so we'll be doing 251 in Game Audio 2. But you're just gonna have to kind of muddle your way through that one for the section 7. And then section 8, I can't remember what section 8 was. I don't know. Let me see if I can pull that up. Section 8 is. Sorry. Lesson 7 is callbacks, which is I have no idea what callbacks are. So this is going to be completely new stuff to me. And then also the lesson 8 is the advanced music system. We're just going to have to like force our way through that one right there. So cool. Well, I guess you've got 15 minutes here if you want to start digging in onto the next section. If you've not done this, like this gives you, I know you have this next 15 minutes carved out in life. So if you want to start digging in on some of the Wise projects and get those uploaded, that'd be sweet. So I guess other than that, have a kick-ass weekend, and I will see you all on Monday. So I'll stick around if anybody has any questions, but yeah, I'll see you on Monday.